So I guess everybody sees the picture? Great. So these are the Fukeshu, and they've been traced back to the 13th century, sort of, in Japan. They were formally recognized in 1677. And they're playing flute, which is called shakubashi music, which you can also still listen to today if you want to. But the story, I think, is fascinating because I think we all recognize what they have on their heads, which is these baskets. And this is what they had, masks, very, very tough masks. And I was always fascinated because we always seem to think, okay, there's a person with a mask. Let's take off the mask, and then we see something. And but in this particular story, it's a little bit different, and it goes like this. So around 1314, 1500, there were samurai, and the samurai who had no master were called ronin. And some of these ronins were then not allowed to wear swords. So some of them redesigned their clubs into flutes, but the flutes were actually weapons. They were redesigned because as ronins, they could not carry swords, so they carried their flutes, their clubs. And some of them got together. And the ones who got together called themselves the Fukeshu. And they produced some papers saying that they were sort of related to some clan in China with some priest called Chozan. And this was all made up, of course. And then, of course, all these documents were lost in a fire and sort of all of that. And so they went to see at some point, 1600, they went to see the shogun, Edo shogun. And they said, well, we want to live as a group. But we are ronin and we cannot collaborate. We cannot be seen as a group, but we have something to offer. So as we play music and walk around the streets, we overhear all kinds of conversations. And so they offered the shogun that they would play music in the street for alms, and in return they would spy for the shogun, and they would tell him all the things that were sort of happening, and he agreed. And then the first thing the Fukeshu did was they rented a place near a temple, and they stayed there for 10, 20 years. They didn't really come out or do anything. But after 10, 20 years, people thought that they were part of the temple. They sort of got the aura of the place. And so what is also very fascinating in this story, what I've always found very fascinating and very empowering, is the fact that this is really this Nietzsche quote. This Nietzsche has this quote saying, "Give me eine Maske, gib mir eine Maske, eine Maske mehr." So this is actually not taking off a mask, revealing something, but it's actually embracing the emptiness and putting up a series of masks, and putting up a mask in the end for people to think that that's the actual mask, for which they also think that if you take it off, you're actually revealing something. But of course, we're not revealing anything because there's just another mask, and there's another mask, and there's another mask. And behind all these masks is pure emptiness. And this to me has always been very important because it's a realization that we can do anything. Not in a Nike, let's just do it way, although we need some part of that sort of to get kickstarted and to kickstart the engine. So we do need that. But in a more fundamental way, that we can start with zero, with nothing, but we always start with zero, and then we start setting up the masks in a particular order for any one of the stakeholders that we would want to encounter that particular mask, and then to actually have that stakeholder take off that mask and think that they're revealing something, but they're just part of what we want them to reveal. So that to me has always been very, like I said, empowering, because it means that if you embrace that emptiness, then basically you can start doing anything. And this is also something that we encountered in the early 2000s. So if you look at this picture now, you would think it's like kind of COVID related, sort of with all the people in the suits. But actually, I took this picture in 2004. It's a small city in Oostenrijk. And these are students, my students then from the Arts Academy in St. Joost in Brabant, Breda and Den Bosch. And this was around the time that in Holland, the smoking pole entered the scene. And the smoking pole is actually this pole, literally a pole, that suddenly appeared in train stations with a little area, sort of a little bit of a round place designed sort of around it. And if you would smoke, you were supposed to go there and smoke near the smoking pole, and then sort of put your ash in the ashtray that the smoking pole sort of offered. And I was thinking around 2004, when I saw this appearing, that this had very little to do with health. And this was the beginning of a very strong behavioral disciplining. Because also around the time, as we know now from all the documents in the European Commission on the Volkswagen sort of disclosures that basically all these testing schemes were sort of set up. There was a tremendous amount of pollution in the air. And this, of course, was known to a lot of authorities. So I was thinking, why is it somehow necessary at this moment in time that people are standing in the open air and that all of a sudden they have to walk to a pole? So that to me spelled that there was something different going on. And around the same time, then this was, a lot of other things were happening. So if you would walk anywhere near a station around 2000, 2005, 2010 in the Netherlands, you would have to basically claw your way through like a jungle of bikes. The bikes would be everywhere. And around the same time as the smoking pole appeared, the bike design happened sort of like around these same places in the train stations. And if you walk up to a place in Holland now, you won't see any bike because they're all underground and every bike has their own space, and it's basically kind of, it's not just numbered, but it will be sort of soon, and then sort of it's your space for your bike and all of that. Architecturally, the same things happened. So around the same time, I was also teaching in Rotterdam, and I went to the new library, and in the new library, all the bookcases were halved all of a sudden. So I still remember, I'm old, I still remember that you could get lost in a library. So I would walk around in the library and there was these huge cupboards, so sort of filled with books, just up until the ceiling. And all of a sudden, and in any library in the world that you go now, you will not see these big bookcases, large bookcases, high bookcases anymore. They're all halved. So around the same time that the smoking pole appeared and I got worried, all the bookcases were halved, and I asked people in the library why this was happening, and they told me that now they could see anything clearly. They could have a full overview of the room. Nothing could happen in between these two spaces anymore. So with the students, we did a few sort of performances. In a sense, we dressed up as smoking poles. I remember dressing up as a smoking pole in the train station of Den Bosch with an ashtray, asking people to use my ashtray, which they didn't for some reason. And then I said, so you're going to walk up to this pole, you're going to walk up to your own prison and sort of stand there and sort of you have no issue with that. And even though you're standing in open air and all of that, nobody seemed to have a real issue with it. So we decided to go to this very small town, which was called Oosterwijk. Nothing very much happened, I think, in that town, sort of ever, but this is us. And one student had these white kind of suits, industrial suits, and the students put them on. And we were the watch out team, the pas op team. And we had pas op watch out stickers, which we put on windows because it's very, very dangerous, a window, because you can bump into it. And we put them on trees because it's very dangerous, because you can bump into a tree and sort of hurt your head. And we actually escorted that lady in red across the street. There was no traffic, there was no one, but we bodyguarded the lady across the street on an empty road. How did she react? Was she upset? Sort of, was she worried? No, she wasn't. She sort of thought, that's a good service. The city has a new service, the Pas Op team, the Watch Out team. Remember, this is 2004. And so she allowed herself to be escorted across the street. At some point, we were standing in places in the open air in the marketplace, and we were looking up because there's a lot of space debris that's falling, and you can get hurt. You can fall on your head. I mean, it's very worrying. So we stood there and we looked up, and we were sort of watching out for the people so they wouldn't be hit by space debris. Unfortunately, there was no space debris on that afternoon in Oostenrijk. But as we walked there across the market, at some point, we were trying to get, well, we weren't trying to get beaten or something, but we were trying to get kicked out. We were trying to hope to get some response that people would say, well, this is insane. I don't need a Pas Op team. I don't need a Watch Out team. What kind of nonsense is this? I mean, but there wasn't any of that kind. So at some point we were walking in a market, and I overheard there was two women walking in front of us. I think it was a daughter and a mother. And I overheard the daughter saying to her mother, sort of, they should have done this much sooner. And at that point, we went into a pub and we got drunk because we thought this is serious. And 2 weeks earlier, we had taken a train to Schiphol. And one of the students started cleaning the windows. And the conductor went ape because she wasn't supposed to clean the windows, but she had the whole elaborate cleaning routine. Sort of. Another student had a small table, and she put the small table next to the toilet, and she had the flowers and all of that, and and the conductor just went insane. He couldn't sort of handle all of these nice things. We were just trying to help him and saying, look, we're just trying to help you and make things clean, and sort of, we're also cleaning the toilet. And we also brought some bingo cards, and we distributed the bingo cards across the train coupe. Within seconds, the whole coupe lit up, because the chill in the air, already then kind of scripted design of this chillness of in the air in public spaces and in between people, was tremendous. And we just had to lit a match, and then everybody played bingo within 5 seconds, apart from one person who started filming us. And as the whole objective of that trip was to go to Schiphol, because they had just installed new cameras that would start to track people with face recognition. The moment we got out at Schiphol, at the train, the police was waiting for us. So it was like, the whole thing was perfect. And so this was around 2004, and sort of doing that in 2004 also made me very, very suspicious of our agency. And it sort of only now, after 15 years, I can make full sense of it. Because what happened recently is that in Holland, in October 2020, the smoking poles were removed from the stations, and now all stations are smoking free. So it takes 15 years for a society to designate something which is quite common as a practice and make that strange, turn this into the not normal, for an entire society to accept it and to find it very, very strange if you would light up a cigarette in that space. 15 years, only 15 years. And it made me see that why all of this was also happening, because from the 80s, 90s, we have this entrepreneurial paradigm in governance that basically has outsourced every public capability to corporate sectors. So if you're now in Holland, that means that the state, of which we all pay like 75% of our taxes to, basically we still do that. It's a bit strange that we do that still, but we still do that. I don't think it will be contested within now and 5 years because of all of this, but this state can no longer steer on money because they have euros. They can no longer steer on law because it comes out of Brussels, and they privatized all instruments, including the trains and the train stations. And this paradigm is if we look at it as kind of a person with agency, it's a little bit like a monster. And this monster is outsourcing capabilities. And as they do this, alongside every step that they're outsourcing a real capability, the only thing that they have to put in that place is behavioral management. So with every step that you privatize something, like you privatize trains and you privatize that, you add a layer of behavioral disciplining so that it still looks like you're still in control, although you're basically no longer fully in control when it comes to real making decisions on the real capabilities. The people actually looking there, actually walking there, actually using all these services, still think that you're in control. And this, of course, is the whole point of all of this behavioral disciplining. And this particular model, sort of this particular governance model, after having outsourced the borders, basically, especially in Europe, but after having outsourced money, having outsourced law, having outsourced all the instruments, in Holland also having outsourced data, because the data, my data are not in my hands or the hands of my government, to which I pay a lot of taxes in order to get some services from which I hope that they will do something with that data, are in the hands of GAFA, of course, Google, Amazon, Facebook, and we all know that story. And now the model is outsourcing its final step. It's outsourcing identity management. It's outsourcing the passport all across the planet. All governance models are outsourcing passports, authentication, verification, signing, all these capability to digital identity providers. So that I realize this is the time that the monster is dying. The monster knows it's dying. It's purposefully dying. It knows what it's doing. It's just it's trying to remove one of its last masks. But as it's removing its last mask, it's extremely dangerous. It's extremely dangerous because now it has to put this full behavioral disciplining in place. It has nothing else left. And it's like, of course, I can call the emperor's clothes at any moment in time. But if I call the emperor's clothes now, it's not such a good thing to do, I would say. So it's not a good thing to do for all of us. So I want to encourage and basically call out to all of us here, all of you here, to not do anything for the next 5 or 10 years, basically. Of course, we're going to do things. We're going to build small building blocks. We're going to read good books. We're going to be nice to our friends and families. We're going to cook some good food. We're going to have some nice coffee. But we're not going into the streets, right? We're not going to offer our blood to this, our energy to this dying monster that, like I said, is really, really dangerous now because it's in the act of basically revealing that it really fundamentally is totally empty. And this is when it's at its most dangerous. I don't even have to go to all the discussions of what's happening now really with COVID and all of this. I don't want to go into intent. It's not as if Bill Gates is behind this. It's not as if it's a conspiracy. And this COVID is probably, or most likely, or it is very, very real. This is what I'm also doing. I'm putting up my mask in the supermarket. I'm washing my hands. I'm being very careful around all the people, of course. We have to do these things. But we don't need these arguments. It's all very clear. It just takes about 3 or 4 mottos. So it's like government bad, corporates are good. This was the mantra from the entrepreneurial sort of paradigm from the 80s, 90s. Then it's like, it's best to have distrust as the default, because if you have distrust as a default, you can only be proven right. You're never proven wrong, because so let's have distrust as a default. And in all the systems that we see now, from Holland to lots of places, we see lots of scandals and lots of scandals just because of this. But it was a motto that was sort of wed to this paradigm. And then the third kind of motto is that you need procedures. You will always go with procedures, and you will always need evidence. You would go evidence-based. So this was the entrepreneurial model. Sort of all hospitals have to have missions all of a sudden. Everything has to become outcome-based. There are no more citizens, just customers. So all of that happened. And it just, when such a thing as COVID happens, it's not as if there's a Bilderberg conspiracy or Bill Gates putting up the phone and all of that. It's just that these three mottos are starting to act on all these layers. And so, for example, when in 2004, the architects all of a sudden started to halving the bookcases, I don't think even they would know consciously what they were doing, but they were just following kind of the air that was going around of this kind of building this kind of transparency. It was the same time that we saw the big squares again revival of the big squares in all the big European cities, building these huge empty spaces. Again, this was not that this was a conspiracy or that it was just the mottos that were aligned with the entrepreneurial model. And as this entrepreneurial model is now going into its last step, it needs to privatize identity, and this is when it goes into its absolute enemy phase, if we want to go with the Fukeshu. So Carl Schmitt, this German philosopher, has this very nice argument, which he says you have the absolute enemy and the real enemy. And the absolute enemy is the eigene Frage als Gestalt. And that's when you have to be careful, because that if that's happening, and it's happening at the moment, we're living it. It's nice. Sort of, there's something that we feel it. It's good. Sort of. So now the monster is really, really real, and and also the monster knows it has to change. So we're up against this absolute enemy. And this absolute enemy determines the quality of the real enemy. So when we were in Oosterwijk, in this little village, we could articulate all these real enemies quite quickly. This need for control, this distrust of people, sort of all of these things. And now we are in this moment of this moment that the Fukeshu model takes off its last mask, and its last mask is the identity and the identity layers that used to be part of the entrepreneurial government model and the model before, which is democracy, states, and citizens. And citizenship backed by a passport and backed by all what that passport has to offer. And at this very moment in time, this is going digital. And as it's going digital, we are now basically in between. We have three options. The one option is called basically Microsoft. And that's the whole space of where identity management is now moving towards corporates. So for example, in Belgium, there's itsme.be. It has 2 million people that are signing in, including my girlfriend, who's doing her taxes with itsme.be. And itsme is a fully commercial endeavor. It's 4 banks, 3 telcos, and Microsoft. And the Belgian government has handed over digital identity management to this consortium of 4 banks and 3 telcos and Microsoft. And they have access to all the 18 boxes in the Belgian identity card system. The Belgian government has notified itsme with an eIDAS clearance. So they're now able also to go to all the other countries. So they're also lobbying in Holland, and I know the people that are doing that. And we're talking to the people in the ministry, asking them please not to go with this, because this means that when we do this, me as a citizen, I would have to seriously stop considering paying taxes, because at that point, of course, it's going to be a little bit worrying not to call the emperor's clothes when I, as a simple person, I'm still handing over 70% of my capabilities to a group of people who have no more agency, and are now even handing the last fundamental public capability to a group of public actors that are going to sell me their capability of signing in with that, and they will have all the capabilities of the data and all of that. I mean, but this is the trick they're trying to pull. So you imagine how dangerous the whole situation is at the moment and how dangerous they are, because this is about billions, but it's also about billions in future capabilities. The other kind of ship that we want to avoid is all the things that are coming out of a lot of Asian countries that want to bake identity into the hardware, which basically means they want to bake identity into the internet layer, which would mean that if you would go online, and the moment that you basically go online with a phone or with a computer, anything you do would be trackable and traceable through the entire infrastructure in the hardware and all the networks. And that's, of course, giving the people who have access to all these resonating data a tremendous amount of agency that we shouldn't do, especially not in this moment in time when actually citizens and simple people like us never had as much capabilities as ever on the planet. So we want to go with the third option. And the third option is called self-sovereign identity. And it's actually quite recent, but it basically says that I, as a person, should be able to stage myself to anyone in a particular way, in a way that I would sort of would like to stage myself. Still, of course, in a kind of communal context, because we sort of because this is about accountability, not anonymity. We want to be accountable citizens, but we want to be this accountable. We want to have this accountability in a kind of transparent way. And the thinking that's going on there in self-sovereign identity is that we're going to break down identity management into different layers. And we're going to break it down into particular acts. So when I only need to disclose going into a bar that I'm over 18, I simply show a credential on a phone or on a QR code that's plus 18. That's all people at that bar have to know. If I'm renting a house and pay an energy provider, that energy provider just has to have a credential that I can pay. That's all. And then I will give him a number on my birthday so that if I don't pay, they can fine me, which I find is a fair deal. If I pay, then I can go my whole life living there without anyone having to know really who I am. There's no need for the energy company to have all that data and to know all that. They just shouldn't know that I can pay. So this is how we're going to build up this new notion of identity. And there's basically three things. There's a wallet, some kind of a way to store it. And for the millennials, Generation Z, and younger people listening into crypto, Cardano, IOTA, the Dogecoin, buying all of these things are pretty logical, and they're happening as we speak. And then we'll have verifiable credentials, and that's basically where the governments will disappear in. So we're offering all these governments a way out. These governments will disappear for 95% into these verifiable credentials. The passport will go there, the driver's license will go there, your diplomas will go there. And this is also fine, because we need to have this kind of negotiation. And then there's going to be decentralized identifiers, and these are things that you can make and bake yourself as a person, and then offer them as trustworthy evidence to other people. So these are basically the kind of things that are happening now. And interestingly, a lot of governments are also buying into this, because they realize at this very moment, of course, there's some civil servants who are in cahoots with the big corporates and are fine with selling off the last things that there is in the model to these people, and they will start to work for them later on. We know that story. But there's also lots of civil servants that have just heart and some brains, and who also want their pensions, because they realize if this happens, they will also not have their pensions in 10 years, because there will be no more model. And these people are waking up, and they're buying into this self-sovereign identity. So this self-sovereign identity, I think, is something that you will see happening in your lifetime. This is something that we can definitely sort of start to think of as the next layer. It's a good layer, because there's something in it for governments, because we can pull the plug. We can start a lot of noise and movements in Europe and tell people to stop paying taxes because there's nothing more that they're funding anyway and they will not see anything back. But what's the point in that? It'll just be not more blood in the streets, more trouble, more breakdown of resources that we then somehow have to start rebuilding. So for 20 years, I haven't done that, and I don't still want to do that because it's not honorable, but it's also, there's no point in doing that. So we need to stall that. So fortunately, a lot of government people and policy officials are beginning to see that that our type of thinking, which of course has an anarchist tradition as well, is not that radical, is not a threat, is actually a solution, and we can help them. And we are now being called in much more to help build these types of solutions. So what's in it for us as citizens? I think for us as citizens, we have a bigger voice, a stronger voice in the negotiations that are going on at the moment in this whole self-sovereign identity space. So I think we can get like 5% or 10% on some issues that we can get towards more accountability, more transparency, more evenness, more balance. I think that's good. I think that's something that we should grab and get. What's in it for the corporates? For the corporates are beginning to realize that this model of extracting of data is no longer really happening. So all the sidewalk lab sort of projects are failing. People are really much more aware of their data. Generation Z is not handing out anything. They're going sort of for this anonymity, which we also sort of do not really want. So the new model basically is, if I have this self-sovereign identity type of situation, and I can start sharing attributes and certain particular characteristics with particular companies, but only those, and I can also get the feedback that they get, I can get that back. And I can be inclined to start sharing more if I can build up a meaningful relation with these companies and with these service providers. And this is now also something that they're of course seeing. So a lot of these big corporates are beginning to realize that instead of trying to grab a lot of data from someone and then just chucking them out, maybe it's much more interesting and much more valuable for them also in terms of revenue to start building a slow relationship with someone for the rest of his life who's going to share a lot of granular data for free, not for free, but freely, that they wouldn't have done sort of anyway. So this I think is happening. And what we have, and what basically what our addition to all of this is this term disposable identity. So what we want to do, so knowing, basically understanding this moment of the Fukeshu, that we can do it, we don't need 100 million, so that we just need some focus. Understanding this moment that we've lived through the 15 years in which they have been able to do this. In 2004, putting up these poles, trying to get people to walk to the place that they would smoke and they would do it. And then after 15 years, removing them and declaring the whole space smoking free. I mean, we must also have some admiration for that. That's a brilliant hack. That's a performance from like a top-down performance that you should have. You really have to say, well, man, that's brilliantly done. Even if they may have not really done it like this, sort of consciously, but we can do it consciously. So we know how long it takes, and we know that it's also possible, so we can do it too. And we can do it by assuming that this self-sovereign identity is going to be there, and it's happening as we speak. And then we say, from this self-sovereign identity, I want every contract, every data transfer that I put out from that, I want that to be disposable. That's going to be a separate smart contract. That's going to be a separate identity. So the energy provider will have an identity of me that's radically different from my dentist. That's radically different from all the other service providers that are sort of out there. And I can also specify for how long that identity will stay. And this is all crypto. And so it means that we can demonstrate it, and we can prove that after 2 months or 3 months, that data is deleted. So in terms of COVID, I would have no real issue if I would be tracked or traced by a COVID application. If I could say only in Ghent for 2 months, and then you delete the data. So things like that are sort of possible with all of these things. So that's this is happening. I will send some links also. So there's a Telegram on which all of this is happening. There's certain teams that we know and also we are part of that are building this. There's code. This is real. Sort of these things are demonstrated. They're being demonstrated at the moment. There's lots of work on it going on. And to me, the very notion of this disposable identity is so beautiful and so elegant because it does what we need to do. So we are up against a model and a framework that has been able to execute every step along the way of this entrepreneurial governance paradigm, really putting a lot of capabilities into a few billionaires and a few vested interest groups of people, very old, evil lines, as we somehow sort of also think or may see. But the beauty of the moment is that as they remove their last mask, they're extremely powerful and dangerous, but also extremely vulnerable. And in that moment, what we can do is we can cut the entire operation by removing the link between one person and one number, because that's what they're counting on. As long as I have the link one person, one number, they can build up an entire new paradigm, which of course they're building up now. It's called cyber physical systems. And that's the control paradigm in which if we don't do this, it will be in Mordor. We will all be in there. And so actually, I don't think we should air this bill. I think we should be very quiet about all of this. I would say, don't air it. Sort of like for the people here, you know what's going on. And for all the others, we should we should ask for silence, because this is really, I really believe all of this is happening, and I really believe it's as serious as it is, and I think we can pull it off. But we should be very quiet about it, and I should be quiet too. So so Marta, sort of over to you.
Marta, yes.
Yeah. Well, that was a fantastic introduction. Where to start from? I think that I share with, well, it's something I was saying when we discussed when I met Will the other day, that I feel that we have a kind of social responsibility to not aliment this sort of hype around big tech, and to not fall into this intellectual content of, just being critical and pointing the fingers without elaborating some alternatives. I think that what is at stake here, also trying to move from the identity discussion to the city discussion, is that what is at stake is rethinking the notion of public space and the quality of public space, because public space has been shrinking in the last, say, century, probably. I would say under three different forces. So the market, the commercial ones that see that they move the public space into a space for transit and get the semi-private or private spaces like, I don't know, shopping malls as the elected place for a congregation. Then we have the second push, that is the technology push. So as Mark Wieser was already predicting in the early 90s, computing is everywhere, and it disappears in the fabric of the everyday. So any mundane object today, any ambient, is permitted by technology, and this has happened in a kind of with a very lazy attitude, I would say, from public powers, who have been jumping on the, the digital transformation bandwagon, call it as you want, but they have been basically assuming that more monitoring qualities meant more governing qualities. And so in this second movement, it's like a public space becomes a monitored space. And then we have the pandemic that completes, it's kind of the cherry on top, and it criminalizes the public space and the interactions that were natural there. And still 1 year after the start, we are basically the best answer that we have is still this, as a society, seems to be the limitation of civil rights. And there was a very nice book by Rebecca Solnit about walking. And she was presenting walking as a sort of indicator of civil liberties. So the very possibility of walking somewhere and the quality of this walk say a lot on your liberties, say a lot on the environment and on the quality of the environment that you're traveling in. I think that in a way, we shouldn't just get trapped into technology discussions. By that, I mean that we should really question what is smartness, what is the smartness produced in the smart city paradigm. Because I think we need to transit to the more, let's say, citizen-centric, citizen-led smartness. And this goes even before discussion on technologies. Already in at the beginning of the 20th century, Simmel was describing the city as the place of intellect, and intellect as the faculty that was utilized by people to kind of react to the overstimulation that was happening in the metropolis. So the city is already a place that is over-rationalized in a way at the beginning of the century, of the 20th century. And it's a city and it's a space that it's hyper-rationalized with technology that has this mental model of, trying to fit the kaleidoscope of our human experience in the binaries and in the classification. So what Rob was talking about, also this possibility to self-define your identity, to kind of define yourself the box and decide which boxes you want to tick. It's quite liberatory. So one of the concepts that I really hold dear, and it's a kind of it's a sort of experimentation, mental experiment for the moment, but I also hope we can do some real experiments around this. It's this idea of cold spots. So cold spots is like, they are, imagine them as geographically delimited areas within a city who have a digital infrastructure that minimizes data collection and that follows along the lines that Rob just described. And so the coldness derives from the lack of this data extractive paradigm. But on the experience side, they are the opposite of cold. So basically they mix the social qualities of public space. So the mixity, the interaction, the sense of place and the sense of community with the well-being attributes of what could be a green area within the city. So in a way, cold spots to me are a way to try to think try to answer the starting question. So what is public space today? what is left of it, and how can we construct a public space that makes use of technology innovation, but that brings back some agency and some self-determination for citizens. So basically, technology we need in a cold spot is like, it's at the same time, I see it as a shield from the current practices and paradigms, and also as an enabler of a different kind of exchange. So ultimately, they are a way where there are areas of the city where we can see a different value exchange among people. One similarity that I see is the one with the energy communities. Maybe it helps. In an energy community, you would have a group of citizens that are located in a specific area who come together, and they decide to share, to build a sort of energy grid, energy market, between them, and relying as much as possible on renewable. So they will get energy from the renewables as much as possible. So save money without asking for energy to classic energy providers. And in case of an overproduction of energy, lovely sunny day, they have the possibility to sell it back to the system. So imagine a similar value exchange in a cold spot. There is a low range production of value that stays and stays located there and is exploited by citizens more than it is today. So I think that a strong quality of cold spots is this idea of proximity. The 15-minute city is getting quite a lot of interest. In Helsinki, they're talking about the 1-minute street. So how do we keep value at a smaller range so that we avoid this long range and opaque value chain that we see today, where value is produced somewhere and then data stored elsewhere, and somebody else is monetizing in other 10 different countries. So I think that it's like on an infrastructure level, it's like you have 3 qualities of cold spot. So the first is proximity that I just described. And the second is privacy that is supported by the Disposable Identities scheme, and that enables, in a way, what I would call a materialized privacy, ambient privacy. So today we're dealing with privacy on screen and with privacy within certain services, and in a one-on-one relationship, very disempowering one, of a citizen with a service provider that can also be, that normally is quite a big, it's a big company. So in ambient privacy, is like we are embedding basically in the physical space this possibility of privacy, and that because it is in a way encoded in the way the area function. If everything is managed to disposable identity, I can in a way disappear, or I can share only some qualities, some aspects of my identity that I decide that then will be stored just for a given moment. And then the third, so I said proximity, I said privacy, and then there's trust. That is the overarching quality. So the infrastructure that is in place is transparent in its purpose and in its beneficiaries, and it's publicly owned by citizens. So basically, this is a way to utilize tech. So to acknowledge that tech exists. Imagine it's a bit. I wish that one day we had, like, as much as parks today are given for granted in urban planning, maybe one day cool spots will be. And so there is this quality of because we acknowledge the existence of technology, so we don't pretend that it's not there. We don't leave it to the disappearance in the everyday. We know it's there, and we make use of it in the everyday. And by this, I think we can create within cities areas that are, in the end, they have a bit like the function of parks in the sense that they restore. They can help restoring well-being. They can be places where it's easier to basically feel human, to exchange with others, to feel in a way protected by the oppression and this very negative and dooming visions that we are experiencing anytime we look at the big picture. So I think that's there's a degree, if you want, of I like to see them in a way as pockets of wilderness within a city. So as places where you can, and with wilderness, of course, I don't mean that there will be rare animals jumping around the city, but I mean also, why not? Maybe it will happen with climate change very soon, sooner than we think. But the pockets of wilderness, in the sense that they allow a degree of liberty, of playfulness, of feeling that you are unwatched in your act within the zone, and that they reinstall a certain degree of biodiversity, of human biodiversity, because we are all living in our bubbles, online, but also offline, because we are less and less exposed to, let's say, the unexpected within public spaces. And this notion can also be pushed to an extreme and be seen as encapsulating in these cold spots also elements that allow a natural biodiversity, like certain kinds of trees or certain kinds of protections for, I don't know, birds in the area, for instance. So this whole discussion came by, I think that it came up, this idea of the cold spot, which is, I mean, of course, still in the making at the moment, very kind of a mental scheme to wrangle with. But I think it came as a kind of a necessity in face of this idea that the public space is disappearing, and that and then there's basically no moment outside and inside where we can just be. You need to get into nature, out of the city, to get away of the surveillance system, and otherwise you don't have it. And I think that, as Rob was saying, proposing these cold spots that would be complementary to any hotspot and any hyper technological hotspot of connection, or 5G, 6G, whatever you want. But all this this notion could help us in acknowledging where we are, not just closing the eyes and saying, yeah, let's just get rid of technology and alter utopia, and propose a different city.
Yeah.
I think that the version 0.0 of a cold spot is probably a park, in the sense that it's the only place, or at least one of the few places within a city that is public and as little technology infrastructure around it. So if I was to make an experiment tomorrow, that's probably something that I will test. But I think that looking a bit bigger, I think it's a full neighborhood that should be a cool spot. Meaning by that I think we should start to see some infrastructures, some digital infrastructures of our everyday as public utilities. So energy is one of them, the internet and the connectivity is another one of them. All these things that we use every day and that today are part of the market, but they are in the public interest. And you see it today with the pandemic, the tremendous difference that are created among the scholar pupils and students who have good internet connections and those who don't. And that's an enormous imperative that is built within the system, because internet is not considered, access to the internet is not considered a public good, a common that everybody should access. So yeah, I would say that in an ideal world, it's neighborhoods, of course, maybe not getting inside the houses, but thinking of the systemic part of a house. Mm-hmm. And the idea of moving them would be fantastic, actually. If you look at it at the individual side, it will always be an individual versus a bigger force, I think, which is a good meanwhile solution while we get to proper cold spot. But I really like this idea of ambient privacy and on keeping it systemic, to embed in a physical space, not just surveillance, but also some more protection and faculties for people.
As if I might say something, I think on this individual level, this notion of this disposable identity is already going a little bit into this, because the whole point of them is that, and the beauty of the moment actually is that this notion of breaking down this individuality into this 200-century-old idea of Rousseau, of having this whole individual personality, is being questioned on a lot of other levels. So we see the whole trans community, the fluidity of people in embodiment of all types of, it's not just he, she, is it, sort of, there's a lot of fragmentation going on in how people feel about their own categories, which used to be quite defined. They're all opening up. If you go to the level of psychiatry, modern psychiatrists have fully abandoned the Freudian and pre-Freudian idea of this full personality that you develop throughout your life and that you then attain at some point. So in modern psychiatry, the fact that things are happening because of circumstances and particular moments and is much more much more sort of happening. And all of this is aligned with this notion of breaking down the digital identity of people in pieces in order to keep some kind of human being, some kind of notion of human beings alive. Basically, in order to have the notion of a human, we need to break the digital identity of that person into pieces in a digital realm. So that's happening. And so yes, if you have this idea of this on an individual level, that's quite powerful. And then I think you should go full out for that, sort of really sort of producing the cold zone, sort of like the invisibility cloak. Actually, some people say is real also. This, if you Google invisibility cloak, there's lots of military work around that, and people think that they've actually cracked it. But yes, it's quite powerful. And then I think for us, because we are dealing with society and with accountability in groups and assemblages of people, then how do we rebuild relationships from these cold zones? But first, you don't have to think about that now. I think you should go fully, totally guerrilla on the cold spot, producing a cold zone. If I'm near that, I get a chill, sort of.
So the way I like to look at these big policy schemes is how you operationalize them concretely, because otherwise they always risk to float in the empyrean of international treaties and never get to the ground. So I think that you can. So basically, SDGs, they could inspire actions within the cold spots. So I talked about, energy communities. That's a way to answer to some of these SDGs. Or if you look at, I don't know, gender inequalities, maybe because of the lack of the kind of democratization that we have with disposable identities, maybe we can enable, I don't know, more activities, more businesses, more interactions on site that take less into account gender. I mean, the thing about gender is, so I've been doing some research about the digitalization of welfare and its gender impact. And in the end, it's not a matter of digitalization. It's just, there's a lot of stereotypes built in the system for the whole history of humankind and public policies. And when you digitalize that, it just reflects the problem. So I think that much of the discrimination that happens, gender discrimination that happens in digitalization, is because the boxes that were there to take are classic ones, like they're just predeterministic. If women are historically employed, then through story, the unemployment office algorithm will categorize them as easier to, more eager to be unemployed. But it's not that it's their fault. That's just an historical fact. So I think that with disposable identities, we can get rid a bit of all these kind of inequalities built in the system and then operationalize SDGs.
I was thinking, I have to start as well, Rob style, with an anecdote. I was a part of a project in which a sort of European, trans-European projects, and there was this big discussion held in in a big room at the Amsterdam City Council, and there was this big room full of experts, and they were talking about identity for hours. Identity, privacy, GDPR, and every now and then from the sleepiness, I would be awakened by identity. Fact is that, I mean, my background is philosophy, especially philosophy of the 20th century, very remote background. When I think about identity, I think about a process, not a thing. So, you know, if you think literature, you have to specify not identity, but for whom, because there is a big difference between Kafka, for example, and Miloš Kundera, or, you know, or pick one, or Hemingway. You know, the whole intention of how to, you know, its identity something that comes out of coming of age, or is it identity something that is Batman, the superheroes? No, there is a very beautiful book that I actually have it here somewhere from Grant Morrison about superheroes. You know, and in the 15 years cycle that Rob so brilliantly was showing us, we got a lot of different acts of conscious operational, let's say, social engineering that have very carefully determined this thing. When I hear about talking about identity, I perceive one of the big, let's say, glasses. Karl Popper talks about the glasses. No, you can change glasses and see reality in different way. He doesn't talk about paradigms like Kuhn, but about glasses. I like this because I always think about the round glasses of John Lennon, no, pinkish glasses. But let's put it this way: you put the glasses of one big, let's say, preconception that comes from what Rob brilliantly was calling the entrepreneurial world, that everything can be seen in problems and solutions. All right, this is one of those big kind of dogmas that we live, and we live because we started to believe this, I believe, because we started to interiorize this monster that we have to sell a solution to a problem. And this, we started to teach it in school. So, you know, already the age of my daughter, people believes that actually problems exist. One of the interesting places where designers use design techniques in which there is no problem is, for example, permaculture. Actually, in permaculture, you say the problem is the solution, but it's the way, let's say, the way to demystify the idea, the notion of problem, in a way that you start to see that sometimes it's useful to operate in the terms, in a flow of situations, in a way in which you identify one aspect and you can tweak it a little bit to have an outcome. And this is usually a good practice, but this doesn't mean that exists something like a problem outside the machine that either is a real machinery or a conceptual one with whom we have constructed a model of this flow. And this is something that is very clear in epistemology. And I mean, contemporary epistemology has completely demystified the idea that there exist problems. So you either can believe that, or you can read your literature and you will be finding out that actually problem is ideology. Now, let's put this apart. But it came into my mind while I was listening this, also because of a very nice observation of Marta, that observed this idea of the smart city with these cold spots in which there could be also animals. No, also the animals can be engineered. This is part of the machine, the idea of society as a machine, I believe, that is also, you know, can be as refined as including nature again into the idea of city. But nature actually, if you go out of the term smart city, that we connect with something very abstract, Seattle, you know, the demo we saw in some kind of demo world, is actually a little bit different when you go in the dirt, in the real world. It's full of cold spots already where your phone doesn't work or where your battery is out. But I'm going to show you something to let's say wake up. I hope, in the hope of waking up a little bit the friends here. I'm going to show something that I just recovered from my Facebook in the moment that we were talking about it. And it's a friend of mine that lives in Messina and posted this picture she took this morning. Hope you can see it. Do you see it?
Oh my God.
Yeah, this is Messina today. Messina is a, you know, 250,000 people city. There is the lockdown, you know, they're not very good in handling garbage, but this is common also in Amsterdam, actually. And this was, the boar was sleeping happily because I had a very nice meal. Well, this brings me to a second thing that I wanted to show you in terms of, you know, this kind of idea that I wanted to show you. What I'm working on at the moment is participation, intending a little bit participation as a form of knowledge. So this is what I'm busy with. And this comes from sorry, I stopped the sharing, otherwise I lose myself. This comes a little bit from another experience. The outcome of that day in Amsterdam was that everybody was talking about identity and the wallet. And me, I don't think, I mean, I'm a, let's say, Mediterranean type of person. You know, so I don't think my identity is in my wallet. My identity is in the way I look. I move in a room, you know. So I tried to make people note the fact that they were all talking about privacy, but some people was coming from Amsterdam where we don't use tents at the window, and some from Barcelona where everything is closed all the time. So what they intended, they would use the term in English, privacy, but they were intending different things. And they were using, giving for granted that identity was something you put in the wallet. And this came from the paradigmatic assumption that you have to sell your software to governments. And so identity is in your document, you know, your passport, the physical thing that actually you don't put in the wallet because the passport doesn't fit in the wallet. But let's say your ID card, right? So was what identity, I said, was a hat. It's more like a hat. It's something you put, you know, to show yourself in a certain way. If you go in a bar, you have a certain type of dress, and it means the interaction you expect with the environment is a certain type. If you go to the doctor, you dress in a different type of way and you put a different hat. So we're trying to stress this point, and actually was opening a wide possibilities in design, so that then with Rob as well, we started designing a way for putting this basic concept into a sort of self-sovereign identity scheme with the type of prerogatives that he very well spoke about. The notion that was most important for me was not in the space, in the situation, the identity I want to express alone, but the way I'm allowing other entities to interact with me. And we have, as humans, a wide variety of rules of politeness that, as we know, changes quite radically from one country to another, from a village to the next, all right? So, for example, a certain attitude in the body language allows you to get there and introduce yourself, and another one doesn't, right? And I had to laugh so much from your presentation, Rob, when you showed the samurais putting the mask, because one of the very interesting rules of, you know, Japan, the feudal Japan had these rules of behavior and this very strict type of body control that is also enacted, for example, in the tea ceremony. And in what I was studying Aikido, and in Aikido you call it Reishiki. So the rules of politeness, of staying on the tatami, how you take from the master, you know, something that the master gives you, how you know, these kind of rules that are so exotic. And we were practicing this with a Japanese master, and he said to us, you know, but remember where these things comes from. It was a society where people used to carry very sharp swords. Ah, okay, so there was a reason. Yes, because if you don't give like this, the other guy can cut you in two, right? So that's the distance. Okay, so this unlocks a lot of observations that tells us that actually our technological space of design is very barbaric. It's not as refined as the body space we inherited from centuries of civilization. And it's a space that has an enormous variety, while the technological space tends to have very little variety. That from perspective of you know, sustainable design, it's not a good idea. We are taking out a lot of variety. So identity is a good theme. Before identity, there was, I'm old, so I also lived the moment of knowledge. And I remember when people started to talk to me about writing the European projects in which the main question was knowledge management. Now, maybe it's nowadays seems very normal to talk about management of knowledge, but I came from a philosophic tradition in which knowledge is a problem. It's not a fact. It's not a thing. It's a process, as well as identity is a process. So, you know, this kind of, always I like when there are this kind of disconnections between various types of main concepts that people puts out and gives for granted, because that's where they don't fit anymore. That is an enormous possibility of design. And design in terms really all kind of type of design if you want, but also in terms of imagination, right? That's, for example, about identity. There is if you don't have, you might have not read Kafka's Gregory Samsa, no? But you might have seen the Fly of Cronenberg, you know, the cinematic version of it, you know, and all the surrealism in Kafka, how it maps with the 90s paranoia in the film of Cronenberg, and the idea of the hyper-individualism, scientific connected, etc. So that's also why, you know, designers and urban planners should get really into watching series on Netflix. That is actually the only thing we can do at the moment to try to survive the lockdown. Yeah, so what I wanted to point out is that, okay, the fact that reality can be split into problems and solution is something that comes from the idea that corporate can very well sell solutions, so they have to create problems. Same thing goes more or less for politicians in this hyper-individualized world we live in. So a politician has to sell himself as a spectacle, therefore he has to form a certain type of problem and a certain type of solution. Everything that we can actually map into the world at the moment, it's not made by things. And this is something that was very well spoken about by both by Rob and Marta before me. We don't have things really in the world anymore. We have a flow of relations that ever changes. We are as well a flow of relations that at different scales changes. And the technology that has been designed is somehow seeing the world from the point of view of relation. This is why we are, let's say, so much talking about data like it's things. data are not important as things. Otherwise, for example, WhatsApp would not be encrypted, right? All right, it's not an encrypted encryption you can trust, but that's another story. The problem is that it's metadata that is important because it's the flows that are important. I'm not interested in knowing if Federico Bonelli will vote for Donald Trump in a certain ideal situation. I'm interested in knowing if that group of flowing, dynamically interconnected kind of bubbles of opinions are influenceable in that particular moment to change, to switch from blue to red, right? So in macro phenomena, and to know about macro phenomena with statistics, you use Monte Carlo, you have to drag a little bit your sample. You use fake news as drugs, you know, to see how it reacts. And then you say, okay, this part of this bubble, of this flow is, you can influence it to go in red. Who's paying me to do that? Oh, somebody's paying me for doing that. And you try to do it, right? So, well, let's go back to my work, maybe. So what is it that you've watched? Where I was tasked to, let's say, invent a human-centric project, a way of teaching human-centrism into this 16 startups project from the European community. It's called NGI Ledger. So there was this idea that everybody had to use, create DLT, so digital ledger solution, using cryptography and applications for the real world, and with a human perspective. This was the task. And we had somehow to give not only the technology, but especially the methodology, how to do human-centric design, because it's a very philosophical aspect, but mostly maps into this kind of problem solution kind of glasses that people puts on. And actually out in the open, you don't have problems. You have people, you have flows of information, you have layers that interact in ways that are disruptive. For example, when you have, like in the story, a whole mountains coming into a village and blocking the main road from 2 big cities of Sicily for a month, you know, just because the mountains has been abandoned for 50 years. And the type of cultivation became obsolete, the mountain was abandoned, and the whole mountains one day with lots of rain flooded into the space below, killed 40 people. And so on and so forth. When you start to go into the real world, the problem solution type of approach is scared because it gets into the dirt. So he calls it the meat space, or has this type of ideological responses, trying to construct a machine, which the model, what the scientists call the model, can be applied as it is taught to reality. And you see it in a lot of the proposed application of cyber physical systems, for example, or the so-called artificial intelligence, that applies very well to a certain type of ideologically defined context that actually doesn't exist. So outside the machine, I should say, you know, the ghost in the machine is the machine. So I took these people, after a little bit of teaching them some artistic methodology to connect, because nerds are sometimes a little bit hard to appreciate rules of politeness and engagement in the real world with real people. Put everybody outside their comfort zone, brought them for a week in Sicily with the spell binding them that they had to create a different product, not the one they were working on for the money, but they would be evaluated on the capacity of creating a product in 3 days, 4 days, starting from zero in the real world. And what you saw is a little bit their impression. The fact is that most of the teams really succeeded, in my opinion, in understanding perfectly that you can actually design very interesting as well applications that can also have commercial success inside that dirt space, just abandoning some of the thought forms that you are used to, let's say. And this kind of way of engaging with reality by jamming is something that has been developed into arts very deeply, especially into theatrical arts, street art. You know, a street artist goes in the situation, reads it, and rules it. You know, a magician does the same, takes your life and creates the perfect situation, which this will twist in a complete different way, and you will have a strange experience of reality. You know, your paranoia starts to light, you start to see all 23s everywhere. You know, this, and all these kind of techniques are codified. It's just that they don't map into the tech design kind of world that that they're trying to sell us. Maybe, I don't know. I mean, you will find a lot of references on the use of serendipity into innovation in the paper that is referenced that I've been invited to write by Sabrina Sauer of the University of Groningen. She analyzed our practices and asked me to write this thing about serendipity. So how to use improvisation in innovation in the sense of a living lab. So a very precise type of context defined for this. And you will find some of my reflection in the paper that I said you that summarizes, let's say, the work that I've done for Rob this week. 2 days ago, actually, we presented it. And Milazzo is the place in Sicily I know that it has most contradiction in Sicily. So you have the big oil refinery power plant there and a marine reserve here. And from the marine reserve to the power plant, you have all the possible contradiction in viability, in administration, in the way people live. People live pretty good with lots of problems, unemployment and all kind of problems. But still, there is a lot of possibilities for redesigning stuff.
We went to look at the old station, which is a abandoned train station. It was very beautiful with a lot of plants growing around it, and also some other empty buildings nearby. There was like an old chemical factory, and there's a lot of empty houses in the area. And so we started to think about how is it possible to make spaces be used. Would like to do a presentation which focuses on the things we learned about the local community, to present how the things we learned and how it appears to us, rather than focusing so much on a solution that we can really provide. And also we're like to do something around trust, because we think that building trust is maybe something that can solve these problems.
Yesterday we did something very different. We went to a village of Giambilieri. It suffered greatly in a flash flood. 40 people died. And the flood was so sudden that the village did not get a proper warning. Although when we were yesterday there, we realized that there had been about 20 minutes of rain coming in and people starting to realize that something might not be right. But nothing was done. So what we were doing yesterday in the village was to explore that could we build an early warning system for the village, that if something similar will happen in the future, the village can mobilize itself. But it's not only about the early warning, because as they were saying yesterday, that there is a siren, but nobody knows what happens if the siren goes off. So what we are looking to do is that can we empower the community, can we identify roles and peoples who can contribute to the safety of the village and create an escalation path that if the early warning signs go off, is there something that can be done? Can the children run the streets and warn off the elders? Can the rescue workers already be assembled to the safety points and so forth?
We went to Messina, where there is a self-organized beer factory. It was made from 15 workers. They lost their job because Heineken acquired the factory they worked to and the brand name, Bira Messina, and they decided to start a cooperative where they can work together and create the beer based on local products and with a strong sense of community inside them. Everything works in cooperation, and they mentioned when they asked what are the three most important things for a cooperative to have in order to succeed, and the answer was courage, mind and heart. And this idea can open possibilities for a circular economic ecosystem in the area. So we asked a lot about how they operate internally and what are their relationships with the producers.
For me, it's very important that when you try to go into this type of situation, you have situation awareness more valuable than information that you bring with you. So the exercise of extracting information taught us a lot of lessons about expectation, about where we take our information, about the different type of information you get if you speak the language and if you don't speak the language, if you have context, not context. There were lots of different strategies that have been put in place to arrive here at the last minute without knowing anything. That was more valuable for me than the ability of over-planning an operation.
In south of Italy, from Napoli down, if you meet someone on the street, you're supposed to talk, even if you don't know each other. So don't be shy, really, because people actually expect it from you. If you look at each other, you can start a conversation.
Different from all the other programs I was following, where they followed always only the lean and agile approach, which is the new religion, and they had to, follow this business line procedure, which I always feel like, I tried it many times, and every time I bounced against the wall. So now I know where is also my path, what is my path, and I'm happy I was here, so thank you.
I think what I enjoyed the most was that I had the chance to really have serious conversations with some important people in the field of co-op. And we had the chance to also come up with a completely new project that is actually, it is theoretically feasible, it's not just something that we just had to present here and it was just just another step. It's actually something that could be done, and I found this really amazing.
And maybe to ask some open questions to the community instead of putting a solution that we don't feel comfortable coming here for 2 days and saying, here you have your solution for your problems. We would rather prefer to open a conversation with them and see what it can inspire.
Thinking a lot about the ethical implications of being strangers and coming here for a couple of days and trying to figure out what all is here, what kind of needs we can fabricate in our minds, mostly, because we cannot absorb the truth and the actual things that are happening.
if you read the papers of human-centric design from the Commission, is all very nice philosophy, even unrelated one to each other, and there is no practice. So we are creating the practice as we speak. We are trying to extract what it means to do human-centric design with open source software and create communities around, seed communities, ideas around this type of activity.
If you build a team, it's always the same process. It's the forming, norming, storming, and performing. And then you end up in equilibrium. And when that equilibrium is tested, you end up always in the same process. Forming, norming, storming, and performing again. And every single pivot is that point. And every single pivot like that is a point that stresses your team to the limit. Some will leave, some will split. And it's much easier to leave and split at this stage than before your entire lives are invested and a lot of fortune is invested already, or 3 or 5 years of your life is invested already. Really not coming with a solution, but hearing out what are the conditions. I think that has been one of the most rewarding experiences I've had ever in my career life. Thank you for working with us.
What we're trying to do with technology is simply to recreate or help what you already know how to do. The values, creativity, solutions you have. You can use tools, that's fine, but they shouldn't tell you what to do. So, this is what we have to offer.
Well, I would like to close only on one little thing that is very dear to me. That is this idea of education. So, how this brings, where this brings. Well, I just give you this little side notice that actually when democracy was invented in Athens, they had the need to, everybody, all the philosophers you read, they were all initiated in the mysteries of Eleusis. So they were all Freemasons, let's say. They had a sort of out-of-the-body experience by drugs that they could not talk about. Plato, everyone. But to create democracy, they had to transform that type of bonding into something different, and they invented theater. Mm-hmm. Theater has been invented, in Athens by the democratic process, etc., as much as we know, just to transform into a safer kind of environment that type of energy. And I finish with Artaud that says and demonstrates to us that actually theater and magic are the same thing.
It was very nice to see this video and to learn about this experience, Federico. It makes me think that really, in a way, engineering is the tragedy of humankind.
Well,
with all respect to the engineers in the room, of course, but this, problem solution and this very codified approach, this smartness that I was referring to.
I think we can twist it. No, I agree on the joke, but we can twist it the other way around and see that if we create a situation in which the engineer is allowed to communicate with the master of beer. You know, you have the engineer and the master of beer, and you create a situation in which they can communicate at the same level. You find that they flourish with incredible ideas, and that goes maybe in the right direction. And so there is a lot of possibilities in this type of space.
And that's also where you need some mixity, no? Between this empyrean of
the magic
solutionists and the real life, real problems.
The magic is to engineer a situation in which this can happen. And then let it happen without fearing too much the chaos that comes out of it, because you are allowed to improvise into a very specific safe zone, like in let's say a theatrical situation, if you want. You are able to improvise, so your tools are modular, so you can recombine them fast and fast prototype. Your narrative is open, so you don't fear somebody that says no, but you use that no to go to the next thing.
Right. No just means maybe try something else. No, not rather than stop.
For a good performer, a no, like a drummer that starts to hit the drum very strong in a composition is an excuse to go in a different direction.
And very quickly, just that's exactly the reason why we're all quite hopeful now. This very intelligence of ours was always taken out. Normally we wouldn't be so old. You would either be in institutions, dead or in jail, or suicided, sort of. So this particular that we have now, that's able to articulate this and see this, we take over the imaginary now. That's the big change. Nothing has really changed. The only thing that has changed is that we have removed our intelligence from their salons, from their circles, from their thinking. And this is also how we see how the stupidity that's in these kind of systems and the chunkiness, this is also the way that I still want to keep repeating how dangerous the situation is, how easily you can get sidetracked. A lot of my friends are sidetracked in all this kind of COVID stuff. Leave it, don't even think about it. Keep doing your job, work on other things. All these things is anecdotal, it will pass. And so if you get caught up in all these anecdotal things and these realities of everyday life, which is very easy, of course, in your generation with all the stuff on your mobiles and all of that, please disregard all that nonsense, right? Sort of just stay focused on these long lines. And that's now the change is really the difference is that we are here now. And Marta and Federico and me were involved in these European projects, and we're in the heart of strategy now, and lots of the heart of certain types of policy making. There's no way they can remove us from there, because we put ourselves there. So if you put yourself there, they find no way to get you out. And this, of course, was the reason. It was the reason why we were always stopped in all of these places at the time. So that's, I think, the beauty of the situation. And again, I want to stress to everyone who's listening here and who's under 30, so like as Bob Dylan would always say, how would you define yourself, Bob, to all the people over 30? Well, I'm under 30, he would say, sort of things like that. Again, just focus on what your intuition tells you to do now, and stay away from everything in actuality or every day at this very moment in time.